Welcome to the US AVD User Group YouTube channel. Coming up is the recording from a live online user group meeting. Please use the link below to become a member of the community and join us for our free monthly events. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. Welcome everybody. Let me find my windows here. This is recorded, and at the end, if you have questions and you don't want them recorded, towards the end I'll stop this and then you can just hop on. I have been saying in each meeting that I'm going to post these at some point. It is on my to-do list, so I think I need to create a new YouTube channel and put them out there. For our agenda, we've got AVD updates. I'm going to go over some stuff that's coming, and then we're going to get to the root of AVD performance issues with ControlUp, and then and that's Trent and Ty, and then Windows 365 or AVD or both with Chris, a co-organizer. So just a reminder of expectations: treat everybody with respect, be involved in the community. Right now, this is technically a user group, so it's a group of users for users. And I say technically because the name change that is pending may be community, but we'll get into that later. Share the group, please share the excitement. And if you want to stand out, share your knowledge. As I said, this is a user group. If you have something to present, we will go out of our way to make sure you're able to do it. So AVD update. So there's a client update that came out September. It fixed some issues with the display settings, improvement in client logging, diagnostics, and error. And then there's also accessibility improvements with that. So I think most organizations have auto update on that, but if not, you might want to check that out. General availability of Azure Virtual Desktop custom image templates. So custom image templates, that's the way to build templates directly in the portal. That's now GA. It uses Image Builder behind the scenes, which uses HashiCorp Packer behind those scenes, but that's not really exposed unless you look at the logs. So that's baked in and that's now available. So if you're interested, check it out. Azure Virtual Desktop Insights powered by Azure Monitor Agent. So there's two agents now for AVD Insights. The previous one or old one uses the Log Analytics agent, which, if memory serves me right, that was a version of the SCOM agent, a System Center Operation Manager. That is going to be retired in August of 2024. So there's a new agent, AMA agent, and there's some information. There's a link and ways of migrating to the new AMA agent. On the screen, there's Insights Legacy and Insights. So you can imagine the legacy is that Log Analytics agent option. Azure Virtual Desktop Classic will be retired on September 30th, 2026. If you're still using Classic, I'm sorry, but it's time to move along. So let's see here. You can't, starting in September of this year, you can't deploy new host pools with it. I think there are still a few probably out there. And this is significant, and this isn't just for AVD, but it's for any Azure virtual machine. So in Azure, when you can spin up a new VM and just attach it to a network, and it gets internet connectivity. It uses default as a behavior, a default outbound internet access. There's different variables or different settings that will dictate, but at the end, if you don't configure anything, you'll still get internet access. That's going to change in September of 2025. They will not do that anymore. So you need to define how your VMs are going to access the internet. And I think this is a good thing because you can deploy like AVD and they get access to the internet. But if your internal organizations has firewalls with rules on outbound internet access, the users who log into AVD may circumvent that with the default internet access. So there's a few options to create outbound connectivity. There's Azure NAT Gateway. That's one of the simplest ones to do. Really, that's just a NAT. It hides your private IP behind a public IP. Azure Firewall is another option. Azure Load Balancer outbound rules. And then let's see, a direct attached IP address. So you can give all your VMs a direct public IP. Those come at a price though. Well, every option here comes at a price. So then the other one is a network virtual appliance or an NVA. That's like if you have Barracuda or FortiGate in your environment, you can deploy that in Azure and then use that. So it will not on September 30th, 2025. Any existing VMs won't be impacted, so it's not going to block internet access for those, but new machines will be impacted. Any questions about that? John?
Any idea when the new image builder will be in GovCloud by chance?
Yeah, no, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't heard. Seems like it's always a little bit behind by a month or two. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Trenton, and we'll get started with ControlUp.
Awesome, thank you. I think I need to be promoted to
Oh, yes,
presenter.
you do. Let me take care of that. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, you should be able to present.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so just before I share my screen and do all that, I'm sharing a video kind of just showing you kind of what our solution can do with AVD and Windows 365. This is actually a little bit early to be showing this, but since this is an AVD audience, we thought this might be appropriate. We're going to be announcing some of these features at Ignite, especially the Azure cost savings. So that will be coming, but if you're interested in it, by all means, you can take a look at what we're offering and then reach out, and we do have certain VIP customers that are testing this out with us. So if you are a customer of ControlUp, or if you want to become one and you want to look at these features, we can certainly set that up for you. So with that said, let me get this started. Does this share the audio?
I'm not hearing anything.
I'm not hearing the audio, no.
Okay, let me try that again then. I'm not sure if that's just a part of share. Yes, there we are. Sorry. Okay, let me try again. Thanks. In today's digital age, organizations are rapidly embracing cloud solutions like Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 to empower their workforce. But with great power comes great responsibility. Administrators face a myriad of challenges. Performance issues top the list, from lagging desktop sessions, unpredictable bandwidth consumption, to the complexities of scaling resources efficiently. Ensuring a seamless user experience is no easy feat. Balancing cost with performance, optimizing infrastructure, and staying ahead of potential bottlenecks requires constant vigilance. ControlUp's Real-Time DX provides proactive and real-time monitoring, alerting, remediation, and automation for your EUC environment to ensure your users have the best possible digital experience. I'll show some examples of how ControlUp makes this possible. ControlUp offers a real-time web console showing you the state of your environment. Here we have a high-level dashboard display showing the performance of my environment as of this moment. Not 15 minutes ago, not 5 minutes ago, not even 1 minute ago, but right now. I can customize this display by adding widgets that are relevant to my role. Each team can define their own dashboards relevant to the information they need to understand the health of the environment. Here, I've built a dashboard to give me some metrics I'm interested in for monitoring my AVD and Windows 365 environment. I have a at-a-glance view of the cost of my subscription, information on my AVD workspaces, some performance information, and scrolling down, I have some information on the performance of my Windows 365 cloud PCs. I have a free space on my dashboard, so I'm going to add a widget that shows me the top 5 CPU consumers for my Windows 365 cloud PCs. I can see I have some AVD users under critical stress. To explore why, I'll click on the widget which will bring me to the real-time details display. At the top is the topology bar, showing all the monitored resources in our environment and their relationship to each other. In the middle is a summary display showing aggregate or average metrics of the resources we are focused on. At the bottom, we have the real-time grid view, showing real-time metadata and performance metrics. Since I clicked on a session stress widget, I am brought to the display with that context. We are focused on session resources and sorted by their stress level. The stress level is a calculated value showing metrics that ControlUp reports as causing issues for this user. The user T-Tailor has multiple factors affecting their performance. ControlUp's Remote DX plugin for the remote desktop software used to connect to AVD or Windows 365 resources pulls some endpoint performance metrics into the real-time display. Immediately, I get relevant information to troubleshoot this user's performance issues. This user has high latencies at multiple points, weak Wi-Fi signal strength, and is connecting to AVD with TCP and reverse connect instead of the UDP with short path. TCP can work just fine over low latency connections, but over high latency connections, the user's experience can suffer. If I want a visualization of the user's home network, I can click on the home icon next to their client device score. This visualization gives me information that ends the guest and test troubleshooting of remote workers. Even with weak Wi-Fi signal strength, the dominant cause of their poor performance is their internet service provider, Shaw in this case. I now have actionable information to give back to the user. They can contact their ISP and now tell them that the latency is being caused by their ISP gateway. The metrics and display within ControlUp can be customized to show almost anything you want. I've created a set of columns called AVD session metrics that show me metrics related to the performance of an AVD or Windows 365 session. Scrolling right, I can see one of my sessions is consuming bandwidth, helpfully color-coded in red. Continuing right, I can see the average encoding time for each frame is quite high. To achieve a fluid response of 30 FPS, the value needs to be 33 milliseconds or lower. It looks like I exceeded this value. I can see 3 frame skipped metrics that can help pinpoint which part of the chain is causing slowness. In this case, I can see some frames were skipped and reported to be due to insufficient client resources. I want to troubleshoot this further. ControlUp not only does monitoring, but remediation as well. Right-clicking on the user brings up an action menu. Each option within the menu can be enabled or disabled based on role-based access controls. For the action I'm going to do, I'm going to take a screenshot of the user's session. I now see what's causing the reduction in performance. The user is watching a video in their Windows 365 Cloud PC, which does not have video acceleration. This is adding additional load to the CPU, taking CPU cycles away from the UI and business applications. I'll send the user a message to alert them to this finding. Now, did the user correct their behavior? Yes. ControlUp's real-time nature shows us the result of their action, and the average encoding time is markedly reduced. I've shown how ControlUp can help in troubleshooting end-user issues. Now, I'm going to show how ControlUp can help in automating your AVD environment. There are 3 primary ways automation can help. Remediation or corrective actions can be automated so that your environment is self-healing. Automation can be used for augmenting the administrator's ability to gather data for a more comprehensive analysis of issues. And automation can provide optimization opportunities. I'll show examples of how ControlUp executes on all 3 of these fronts. I'll start with remediation, that is, correcting issues as they occur. With automated remediation, there are generally 1 or 2 factors that need to be considered. Those 2 factors are understanding what a failure state and a success state look like. I'm going to use remediating FSLogic's disk compaction as an example. FSLogic's disk compaction is a feature to save disk space on your file share hosting profile containers. This feature can be disabled if the optimized drive service is non-functional. By forcing a failure, I can see there are 2 properties that change their state: disk compaction state and disk compaction compatibility. I can use these 2 properties to create the automation. Switching to the ControlUp configuration console, I can start to create the automation. I'll click on Triggers and then Add Trigger. ControlUp has a variety of trigger conditions to execute automations. I'll be selecting a Advanced Trigger as I will be looking for changes in metrics that aren't covered by other trigger types. The record type will match the view we had in the web console, which is machine. ControlUp's trigger conditions can have a good amount of complexity by setting from and to states. I'm only going to focus on changes into a failure state. The two properties I want to trigger on are FSLogic's disk compaction compatibility and FSLogic's disk compaction state. I'll set the failure values per the instructions. This looks good. I'll review the two state conditions and then select my scope. I'm only interested in applying this automation to my AVD and Windows 365 machines, and I'm going to set my scope as such. Here I set the action to execute when the trigger is activated. I've already created a script action to reset the optimized drive service when it becomes disabled, so I'll select it here. And now I'll name and finish the automation. In order to test the automation, I'll simulate a failure. On my machine, I'm going to disable the optimized drive service. ControlUp will detect the change in the two properties and then execute the remediation. What you are witnessing here is the speed of the automation, as this is occurring in real time. And within a few seconds, the issue was self-healed and FSLogics on these machines are operating as we expect. Automation can also be used to gather data that may be time sensitive, like Windows event logs. Windows event logs in their default configuration can roll over very quickly, preventing you from looking at an issue after the fact. Fortunately, we can use ControlUp to gather data at the time of the incident. I'm going to set up a new trigger that gathers data about long logons and their root causes for review after a slow logon had occurred. I'll switch back to the configuration console, go to triggers, and create a new advanced trigger. I'm going to add a two-state condition of logon duration greater than 120 seconds. Any logons longer than that will have the analyze logon duration script action executed and the data gathered, and I'll email the results to myself for review. An optimization automation I'm going to demonstrate today is using ControlUp to enable cost savings optimization for AVD. Machines in Azure can be charged at a rate that is measured per second. The more seconds that a machine is online when it could be stopped and deallocated is money wasted. ControlUp has a real-time polling interval of 3 seconds and can execute Azure Power actions within 3 seconds of the last user logging off at the end of the day. By combining multiple data sources, data from Azure, data from AVD, data from the Windows agent, ControlUp can execute complex automations easily. It is only 11 days into the month, and we can see that the effects of using ControlUp to power manage our Azure Virtual Desktop machines. The machine whose name ends in 0 is running 24/7, and the machine whose name ends in 1 powers off at the end of business as soon as no users are detected on the machine, and powered on 1 hour before the start of business. To accomplish this, I have created 3 triggers. The first is a trigger that operates on a schedule to start the AVD machines in the morning. The second is an advanced trigger which works on state changes. It will execute when the user session counter changes to 0, but not execute on machines with the user session counter already at 0. To take care of those machines, I have created a third schedule trigger that will ensure all machines with 0 sessions are stopped and deallocated when its time is reached. I'll examine the advanced trigger first. This trigger uses 2 data sources, ControlUp agent-based data and Azure Power State data. I want this automation to execute against machines when these 3 properties are true: when the Azure Power State is running, when the user sessions count equals 0, and a final condition, which is an exclusion condition, to not execute on any machine with the defined name. ControlUp can use simple text matches or complex regular expressions within the filters if more complexity is required, or even execute against or exclude machines with certain Azure tags assigned to them. In the scope, I've set it to target only my AVD machines hosted in Azure. I've also set a after business hours schedule for when the trigger should be active. For the action, I have a script action that uses ControlUp's monitor commandlets to execute Azure Power actions. The machine name is passed to the script, and stop and deallocate command is then sent to that machine. Next is the scheduled trigger action to stop and deallocate machines. This trigger is nearly identical to the advanced trigger. but I have it executing a couple minutes after the advanced trigger becomes active. This ensures that I've level set the environment by ensuring only machines with user session counts greater than 0 are being monitored. The advanced trigger will execute on those machines where their user session count drops to 0. The last set of optimization triggers I want to talk about revolve around getting idle users off these expensive multi-session AVD machines faster. Colloquially known as the end of the day problem, I've written a blog article about this challenge, and here I'll show how ControlUp can solve it. The end of the day problem essentially defines the waste dollars that occur when users are no longer working but have left their user sessions on Azure machines, which prevent them from shutting down. The amount of time that users can be on those machines is defined by their idle and disconnect state timeouts. When set via group policy, these timeouts do not have much granularity, going from 1 hour to 2 hour to 3 hours and more. If you wanted 90 minutes, you need to set the timeouts through some other mechanism. Another challenge is this timeout value stays with the user from the moment they log on. If you change it later, it will not affect existing sessions. However, ControlUp automation can execute session lifecycle actions at values and times that you define. ControlUp monitors two properties that are essential for this to work: the session state and the idle time. By combining these two properties, we can target users with newly defined idle or disconnect times. The default idle and disconnect timers in my environment is 2 hours each. That means the end of each business day, if just one user per machine does not log off, then the machine will stay online for 4 additional hours. However, I can implement 4 triggers to advance the session lifecycle to bring that 4 hours of waste down to 1. I'll show you how they work. I have 2 triggers for each state I want to advance the session lifecycle: an advanced trigger that will monitor for when users come into the desired idle time state, and a schedule trigger to level set the environment when the user falls into that time. I'll look at how to configure the advanced trigger first. I want to target session-based properties, so these are all session triggers. In the filters, I've set it to look for users who are active, which means their screens are being remoted to them. An idle time greater than filter to capture users who have been idle for more than 30 minutes, and I've included an exclusion to prevent this trigger from executing on a specific machine. In my scope, I'm going to target my Azure-based AVD machines and set my schedule to after business hours for when this trigger will be active. The action to execute will be to move these users to a disconnected state. There are 2 changes for the disconnected triggers. When users are in a disconnected state, what does our trigger look like? It is very similar with one change to the trigger filter. The state is now looking for disconnected as the property to look for with everything else the same. The action is now log off, which will log off users that have been disconnected for more than 30 minutes. The schedule trigger, which level sets the environment, is identical to the advanced trigger for the action and filters, but it has its start time defined in line with the advanced trigger's after business hours schedule for when it becomes active. The last cost savings feature I want to show is ControlUp's sizing recommendation for Azure machines. ControlUp combines performance data of your Azure machines and can suggest alternative VM sizes to suit those needs. Above and beyond that, ControlUp can also show you a variety of machine suggestions and the cost savings or additional costs you may incur by moving to that machine type. And if you are in a migration to Azure, ControlUp can also suggest Azure VM sizes that will match the performance characteristics of your on-premises machine. This report needs some information first. First-time users will go through this wizard, but I'm going to click on Edit Report to bring it up again for me. You need to define your licensing agreement with Microsoft, how your machines are licensed, which geography and region we should look for suggestion data, what features you need on your machines, and then the currency and what cost option you want to see information on. If you are on pay-as-you-go and you want to see what options are available for reserved instance pricing, then select reserved instance pricing and the term. ControlUp will use the information to query things like the machine types available for that cost option, as not all machines are available across all cost options, and the pricing information. My environment is pay-as-you-go, so I'm going to select reserved instance pricing for 1 year to see what my options are. As I scroll down through the report, I can see the suggested VM and disk type recommendations, what those machine types will cost, and so on and so forth. Continuing to the data per machine view, I'm going to sort by assigned VM size to show some interesting data. My top 2 machines are VMs on Azure. Everything else is on premises. The custom sized machines are on-prem VMs on Azure Stack HCI. The rest are non-Azure managed machines and interesting to look at from an on-prem to cloud migration perspective. I can see my Azure machines are DS2 v3 machines, and ControlUp is suggesting B2 PLS v2 with a change in disk type and size as well. The total cost option reflects the report option we chose, reserved 1 year with an estimated 79% savings over our existing pay-as-you-go standard DS2 v3 type. If I want to understand how ControlUp came to this recommendation, I can click on the machine name and ControlUp will show performance data for the last month. ControlUp has noticed that my usage is predominantly under 2 vCPUs and under 4 gigs of memory, and thus recommends me a B2 PLS v2 VM size. The disk metrics show performance data of the current disks and recommends a P10 disk versus the E6 disk based on my usage. E6 disks are rated for a max burst of 600 IOPS, and I have exceeded that, which means ControlUp is suggesting I upgrade my disk to one that can support my workload. One last thing. All right, there we go. So I am obviously available for any questions, but I know that was the allotted time for my presentation. So if
we'll open it up. Anybody have any questions? You can come off mute or type them in. So this is agent driven. There's an agent for this.
So we get data from multiple sources. There is a ControlUp agent that we do recommend to install, and that's how we get Windows performance data, session performance data, and process performance data. It's not required, but you miss out on a whole lot without it.
Right. Pricing, question mark.
Yeah, great question. So to be fair, I'm not a salesperson. I don't actually have pricing information, but I do know that it scales with users. So the larger your environment, obviously, the less it costs. Pricing is based on concurrent users. So we don't base it on the number of virtual machines you have or the number of vCPUs you have. It's based on number of users you have. So if you have 500 users, it'll be 500 concurrent session licenses.
So it's concurrent, not named users?
That's right.
Yep.
Concurrent. Yeah. Yeah. Makes it simple, I think. And when we do the POCs and stuff, when we get the software installed, it does track what your max concurrent sessions are, and then we do pricing based off that.
Right. The user log off is always interesting. Whenever I look at that, there's no option for users to log out of a session in AVD. You can right click on start or Windows or whatever, and then go to power, I think, and there's a log off option there, but no end user is going to do that. So having some mechanism to disconnect idle sessions and log off disconnected sessions, I think, is important.
Yeah, 100%. I know, I come from a healthcare background where we had ultra aggressive timeouts, 1 hour idle time and 30-minute disconnect times. And the challenges there was it was so aggressive that users would go for lunch, come back, and their session would be gone.
Right.
But when you talk to a lot of AVD customers and stuff like that, obviously that's a poor user experience and they want to give a good one. Well, to give a good one, you have longer timers, right?
Right.
So then the challenge is that costs you money at the end of the day if the users forget to log off. So if they just close their laptop or walk away, that session, will continue for those additional times. So yeah, I think the sliding timeouts feature that we're able to do is kind of killer, but yeah, we got to see it more out there more.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I will hand it off to Chris.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for presenting. That's great information.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right. Give me just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my PowerPoint. And just let me know when it comes up. Oh, okay.
There it is.
All right. So let me just give you a quick introduction. My name is Chris Cavazos. I am a principal consultant with Quisitive. My areas of expertise fall in Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, as well as systems management, Azure infrastructure, and security. So today I'm going to be talking about Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop or both. The reason why I think this is a pretty interesting topic is, with AVD coming out in late 2018, 2019, and then we have Windows 365, which is I guess almost 2 years old now. A lot of companies, especially coming out of the pandemic, are looking for ways to provide essentially desktops or applications remotely. So that way, if there is a disaster, or if we, God forbid, we have another pandemic, there are ways that they could, their employees can work from home with their own device and still get their work done. So, this question comes up whenever, a customer approaches me, client approaches me and asks me, hey, we've heard of Windows 365, we've heard of Azure Virtual Desktop. What would you recommend? Or what should we use? And obviously the answer could be all over the place depending on the type of organization, what they want, their use cases are. So essentially I thought I'd put something together and talk about, essentially the differences, pros and cons. And then I have a couple of scenarios that I kind of added some flair to. This Travis will understand because we've presented before. I added some flair too. So to hey, in these particular scenarios, what do you think you would recommend to those particular organizations on which solution to use? So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm just going to do some very high-level explanation of both of these solutions. I'm sure that a lot of you here, this is a AVD user group, so I'm sure a lot of you understand the solutions. But I'm just going to give some high-level explanations of the solutions, just in case there's people here that they don't. This is essentially that they're being introduced to these technologies. So what is Windows 365? It's a cloud-based service that creates a new kind of Windows VM called a cloud PC automatically. Each cloud PC is assigned to a specific user. So if you're coming from a VDI background, it's essentially a persistent desktop. But more or less, this is a VM that is dedicated to an individual user. It's available in 4 editions: Business, Enterprise, Frontline, and Government. So if you have a government cloud, you now have the ability to utilize Windows 365. I'm going to focus on Enterprise. I'm going to talk a little bit about Business, but I'm going to focus on Enterprise, and I'm going to just give a couple of blurbs about Frontline and Government. I'll start with Government. I believe with Government, you have the features that are available to you in Enterprise, with some exceptions. I have not touched W365 in the Government tenant yet, so I cannot give more information, but I'm sure we'll be getting these requests as the months come by. So in the future, I hope to have a lot more information about Windows 365 in a Government tenant. Essentially how this works, you have a license assigned to a user. When they're provisioned, they get one cloud PC that belongs to them, and no one else can log into it. Obviously you have some administrative tasks that administrators can do, but as far as another standard user, it is one user to one cloud PC. When that license is removed from the user, the cloud PC is essentially deprovisioned and it goes into the ether. This is how it works in Business, Enterprise, and Government. However, with Frontline, you have one license that can be assigned to 3 users, and 3 individual cloud PCs will provision for those 3 users. However, the caveat is only one user can be logged in at a time. So even though there are 3 cloud PCs that are available, because of the type of license, the Frontline license, only one can be logged into their cloud PC at a time. Now, where this is advantageous is if the organization has shift work where you have, first, second, third shift, and, it's a lot more cost effective to purchase a frontline license versus purchasing a business or enterprise license for each individual user. So that's the whole thought process behind Windows 365 Frontline. And then all of this is provisioned in Intune. There are some additional configuration if you're wanting to use hybrid join, which we're going to talk a little bit about coming up. But essentially, the provisioning to say, hey, I want to provision a cloud PC for this user, and they have a cloud PC license. All of that is done in Intune. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to focus on enterprise for the majority of this presentation, but I'm going to just give you some quick differences between business and enterprise. And the reason why I'm not really focusing on like government and frontline is I've done a proof of concept for frontline. Like I mentioned before, I haven't done anything for Windows 365 government, but the majority of my deployments have been either business or enterprise. And when I say business and enterprise, I say it's probably 0.5% business and 99.5% enterprise. So I haven't done too many business because that hasn't been requested. Most of the time, customers go with enterprise, but because that's what I have experience in these two versions, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about the differences. And I'm not going to read through everything here, but I'm just going to talk about the information that I have highlighted. Domain join, if you have a W365 for business, you can only join Entra ID. There is no hybrid join option. You have to have enterprise for that, or frontline. Provisioning, you can only utilize images from the marketplace for 365 business. With enterprise, though, you can create a custom image that you can use to provision your cloud PCs. There is no policy management whatsoever unless you go in there and start dumping registry reg files and importing them into the registry. There is no type of centralized policy management. But with for business, with enterprise, you can't. If it is hybrid joined, you can utilize GPO, or you can also utilize Intune. You can deploy applications, so those are the same, but the other bullet points there are the information that I've highlighted. Monitoring, there is no monitoring at all. If you try to utilize, if you try to load a log analytics agent, you're going to get nowhere. There is no supported monitoring for Windows 365 Business. However, for 365 Enterprise, you can utilize endpoint analytics. There is no in-blade or in-portal troubleshooting for 365 Business, but you do have troubleshooting for Enterprise. There is no partner support, we just had ControlUp. There is no integrated partner support for Windows 365 Business, but there are APIs and there is partner support for Windows 365 Enterprise. And then resizing, which is become more, I don't want to say in vogue when it comes to Windows 365 and AVD. For business, it's not supported. Once you build a VM, that's it. If you need a bigger size, you have to trash it and re-provision another one. With Windows 365, and that's for business. For Windows 365 Enterprise, you can resize, but you have to purchase the licensing that allows you to resize to a bigger VM or bigger cloud PC. So what's Azure Virtual Desktop? It's a solution that publishes desktops and applications from Azure. You get full Windows 10 or Windows 11 multi-session deployment in Azure, meaning that you don't have a VM per user. It's essentially a series of VMs in a host pool that publishes desktop sessions to your end users, and you have multiple users on one VM or session host. If you deploy an image from the marketplace that is multi-session with the Microsoft 365 apps for Enterprise or Office, the installation of the Office apps are optimized to run in that multi-session OS. And where you have the advantage for this is Teams. Now, there are some modifications that you do have to make to get the most out of Teams, but out of the box, you can utilize it and it will work. Obviously, like I said, there are optimizations that you can make to have Teams run better, especially for your voice video. But out of the box, some of the optimizations are already there. You can migrate, if you have a RDS farm, you can migrate that up into Azure, and you can have those RDS sessions available on any device. And you can also manage all your desktops and your apps, because you can also have a Windows Server in AVD, and you manage it all from within the Azure portal. And again, all of this is provisioned in Azure. Some of the key benefits of AVD, and again, I'm not going to go over all of this. I'm just going to hit on the points that I have highlighted. Travis hinted on this when he was talking about the new features that have come, that utilizing the Azure Compute Gallery, our templates to build your AVD environments has gone GA. So that's one feature that you could use to manage your images, is essentially utilizing the image builder and Azure Compute Gallery to manage those images for you. So that way, instead of having, an image that you build from a VM, you actually have, your ARM templates that you can utilize to build your images for AVD. Also with AVD, you can utilize MSIX app attach to dynamically attach apps to your AVD user sessions. So essentially, it's you create these MSIX packages, and when you have you assign those applications, those MSIX apps, to a Entra ID group, and when that user logs into AVD, that app will be available to them like if it was installed on the VM that the session is presented from in the host pool. But essentially, it's an MSIX app. And then Travis talked about this previously. You can utilize AVD Insights to troubleshoot errors or performance. You have all kinds of metrics and whatnot available to you in Insights. And then when it comes to resizing, you can resize the virtual machines on the fly. Obviously, the one thing you have to keep in mind is that, the bigger the VM, the more the Azure compute cost is going to be. And here are some differences between Windows 365 and AVD. And again, what I'm focusing on here is the enterprise version of Windows 365 and the differences between it and AVD. For domain join, both Windows 365 Enterprise and AVD support hybrid join, but you have to have your backend VNet configured to connect to your on-prem data center or to a domain controller so that it can perform the hybrid join. Licensing, really the biggest difference here is that each licensed user for Windows 365 Enterprise, they have to have an enterprise or a Windows 365 Enterprise license, as well as Intune and Azure AD or Entra ID premium license. Windows for AVD, you don't have to have that Windows 365 license, but you have to have a Windows 10, Windows 11 Enterprise license, which you have with your E3, E5, F3, F5, all those type of licensing packages that you get from Microsoft. Management, it's for Windows 365 Enterprise, your Cloud PC automatically provisions, and it can be customizable because you can utilize custom images. For Azure Virtual Desktop, though, you have to actually build that infrastructure. You have to build the host pools, the VMs, your workspace and whatnot. All of that stuff you have to build before an end user can utilize it. You can deploy applications with Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop with Intune. You have to have the Intune license. Also, if you want to take it a step further, if some of you guys are utilizing Configuration Manager, you could still use Configuration Manager to manage your Windows 365 Enterprise Cloud PCs or your Azure Virtual Desktop session hosts. You just have to go through the process like you would a physical device to get that Configuration Manager agent on there. User profiles, again, for Windows 365, it's one cloud PC to one user. There's really no profile management. You'll have to add, you'll want to add some management for OneDrive, just like you would a physical device. But as far as like actual profile management, you don't need it for Windows 365. But if you have a shared host pool or a pooled host pool in AVD, you don't have to have it, even though it's most people say you need it. You don't have to utilize FSLogix, but if you want any type of profile management, you need to set up FSLogix. And then Windows updates, you can for Windows 365, you can use Intune to manage your updates. For Azure Virtual Desktop, though, you can use Azure Managed Updates or Intune. And for both of these, again, you can utilize Configuration Manager as long as you go through the steps to get that config man agent installed. User experience. Now, this is, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, this is the one area where I think, and I'm like I said, I normally push AVD, but here's one thing that I think can has a step up on AVD. And when I'm talking about AVD, I mean AVD, and you have a personal host pool, is that users can actually restart their device. If it just gets wonky, they can restart it from the Windows 365 portal. You can't really do that in any version of AVD. As far as administrator access, you can have administrator or standard access to users on both platforms. Again, user profiles, we talked about it previously, and then updates. The updates are going to be the behavior is going to be the same on either or, just depending on what systems management tool you decide to use. So Windows 365 pros and cons. And again, this is all subjective. This is just from what I've seen in my experience deploying these for my customers. The pros is it's simple to purchase. You have one license per user. It's the easiest to administer by far. Again, if you're familiar with Intune, all you have to do is build your provisioning policy, make sure your licensing on the back end is correct, and then just deploy that provisioning policy to your users. And as long as the licensing is good, they'll have a cloud PC available. Simple to set up. And this is another big thing, as far as the simple to administer, simple to set up, and fixed costs are like the biggest selling points of Windows 365 in my experience. Yes, you can kind of manage through like scaling plans in AVD to try to minimize the costs, and it can actually be cost less over a period of time to utilize AVD for your desktops. But there are just some organizations that I just want to know how much I have to pay, period. And that is a big factor for customers utilizing Windows 365 over AVD. Each user gets a personal desktop. They can manage it themselves. There's no seat limit. Again, I mentioned this previously, users can be standard or local admins. Configurations can be deployed via Intune, and you can monitor via endpoint analytics. The cons, and again, it's subjective from my point of view. There's no cost optimization options. Your cost is going to be what it is, whether the cloud PC is utilized 24/7 or it's not utilized at all. Also, you have limited VM sizes. Now, you have a lot more options now than you did, heck, even 6 months ago when you're picking a VM size for Windows 365. But you don't have the tons of options that you have, picking a VM size for Azure VM that you can in AVD. And then this is actually coming up a lot more now, is GPU support, which you don't have yet in Windows 365. AVD pros and cons. The pros, it's, a flexible configuration. If you know what you're doing, you can configure a host pool to exactly what you need. No seat limit. Again, like Windows 365 Enterprise, you could have standard or local admin users. You monitor via AVD Insights, which Travis and I, Travis talked about previously, and I mentioned here not too long ago. You do have cost optimization options. Again, the built-in one is the scaling plans, where you can actually, shut down the number of VMs as the day moves on to the end of the day, and then ramp up the next morning, or however it works for you, and then ramp up to your busiest time in the middle of the day, and so that way you can save on some Azure compute cost. Also, they have a excellent partner system. We have ControlUp, Nerdio is another big one. There's several third-party partners that have products that can help you manage your AVD environment. The cons, again, just subjective from my opinion, much more complex setup. You have to know Azure to a certain extent, Azure infrastructure at least. If you are a novice at Azure, even going through the portal may be overwhelming to you, trying to build AVD environment. Definitely, if you were using Classic, yes, it is completely overwhelming. But even building with the current version of AVD using the Azure portal can be overwhelming. But if you have experience in Intune, it's fairly self-explanatory to provision a cloud PC with Windows 365. It can be more expensive if you don't utilize optimization. So if you build a lot of, D10, D16 servers, you have 50 of them. If you don't scale appropriately, you will have a hefty Azure bill. So I always recommend, utilizing the scaling plans to try to save some money on Azure compute. Another thing is, to follow on that is its varying costs. Depending on how you use AVD, the cost could vary from month to month. So that's just one thing that you have to take into account. And kind of like, and the reason why I have an asterisk here, because this, some people can actually think this is a good thing. Most of the time, depending on the organization, I feel the same, is there's no end user VM management, meaning you can't restart the VM. If something goes wrong and you have to have the VM restarted, you have to reach out to an Azure administrator to do that. All right, so again, that's just really a high-level overview of both solutions. Are there any questions for anyone that hasn't had much experience in either Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop?
Hey, got a
All right.
question for you.
Sure.
Got a question for you.
Mhm.
With Windows 365, are you like in AVDs? We have a regional, right? From Southeast Asia to other places, other regions in there, and the public IP. I did a application gateway so they can constant, because our application dependency, so you have to have a one public IP so they can connect it. So what I did is like create like application gateway associated with subnets and blah blah blah. How can it be possible with Windows 365? Is it possible?
I don't know 100% if that is the case. I know it's 100% possible with AVD, but I'm going to say I don't think it is, although that is not a scenario that I have encountered yet. So I haven't even tried to do that, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that no, especially since the provisioning of that VM from, the disk and the storage is done automatically. It's not something that you can customize like you can when you build an Azure VM. I'm going to go out and say no, but I'm not 100% sure. That's something that I would have to look up on.
Was a question about like deploying to a specific region?
Well, that
No.
Go ahead.
So Travis, question is like with AVDs, we scattered all over in different regions across the world. One of the application dependency is it's a web app, but the dependency is like you have to have one IP address. So all the associated public IP is supposed to be one IP. So the solution was, it's like you create the application gateway associated with the subnet, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
It gets through one public IP for all the images into one. So I'm reversing that questions to Windows 365, which I'm not aware of it. Is it possible to do it in there?
Well, with Windows 365, you have there's two different ways of configuring the networking. One is to use the Microsoft managed, and whatever region you select for that network is where the actual machine's deployed. But you can also use Azure VNet. So if you attach it within the provisioning policy, you can
Okay,
configure
yeah,
Azure VNet, and if you attach it to that same VNet that your AVD is
yeah,
connected to,
yeah. So
then
that,
yeah,
okay,
you could route it out that way.
yeah, yeah, that was the answer I was looking for. If it is possible to attach with the VNets and the subnets.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, so here is this. It's. I'm going to throw out some scenarios in here, and I've you know, I changed names to protect the innocent, but I also threw a little bit of my own flair in there. I am a big Star Wars fan, and so I just decided to throw some flair into these scenarios. Again, these are things that I've encountered in my work utilizing or deploying Windows 365 and AVD. So it's essentially, I'm going to throw these scenarios out at you, and then I guess to say, so that we don't have everyone speaking at once, if you want to take part, you could put your answer in the chat. Again, there's no wrong answers really. It's just you know, taking what you've picked up here as well as, you know, out in using this or learning about it out in the real world and just seeing how you would apply it. All right, scenario one. The Carillion Engineering Corporation employs 200 agents that work remotely on different planets. To reduce equipment costs, they wish to provide a remote desktop where users can access data and information on-prem and in the space cloud. The engineers are very familiar with Azure infrastructure. All these agents all perform the same tasks, access the same data, and use the same applications. So in this scenario, what would you recommend to this particular organization? And again, no wrong answer. What I did was I suggested Azure Virtual Desktop with a pooled host pool to support these 200 agents, so that, and especially since they basically all do the same thing, need access to the same stuff, that is what I recommended to versus, you know, Windows 365 or AVD with a personal host pool.
How many session hosts you created for 200?
200 agents.
Per session is 15 you're talking about?
No, actually, I had I created I had a bigger VM where I
Okay,
housed 25, a max of 25 users per VM.
okay.
And so that gave me 8. But they weren't all logged on at the same time. So, you know, with scaling plans and whatnot, you know, not all of them were on. The VMs, that is, were on at the same time. So it wasn't like they had to pay, you know, 24/7 for those big VMs.
Nice.
All right, scenario 2. The Empire has some officers who keep having their expensive computers destroyed by stormtroopers blasting them on accident. They want to provide these officers with a desktop that can be accessed remotely from any type of device. The Emperor wants the cost to be the same every month, since the Empire doesn't pay for training, the engineers are not familiar with Azure, but they know how to use Intune. This was really easy. I didn't even, in this scenario, again, names are changed to protect the innocent. Talking to their engineers, they had no idea what they were doing in Azure. So, but they utilized Configuration Manager and Intune with co-management, so they knew Intune. Obviously, I recommended that they used and the number of desktops that they needed were less than like there were like 25. So I recommended that they used Windows 365 Enterprise. And then the final scenario, which kind of led me to this presentation overall. The Rebel Alliance wants to migrate their existing VDI solution that supports their Starship designers and a small number of VIPs to a solution in the Microsoft ecosystem. The current solution provides each user with their own, and I typed this wrong, not their own VM, but their own desktop session. So essentially they had a persistent session in the previous VDI solution. The designers use graphic intensive apps, and the VIPs require a lot of white glove assistance from the desktop team. The IT engineers focus on Azure, so they get annoyed when the desktop team asks for help with the VDI solution and wishes they, meaning the desktop team, could take care of it themselves. So this is a scenario where I recommended both Windows 365 to utilize with their VIPs, but Azure Virtual Desktop with personal host pools, so they could attach, give them big VMs and attach GPUs if needed. So here's a scenario where I actually sold them both. All right. So again, I had to go really fast because I didn't, I think this was supposed to be an hour. So I went really fast. But are there any questions about anything that we went over, or any of these scenarios? Maybe give some more detail if I can about the scenarios that I just presented to you guys.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. All right, Travis, I guess we'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, not really a question, but more of a comment that I've always, when Windows 365 first came out, there was some criticism on the cost. And I think it's really an apples and orange comparison between the two, because what you lack in cost, with that monthly fee, from AVD, there's administrative overhead. So it's a really tough comparison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of times though, it's not the administrators themselves that because they most of the time they understand that they have the additional administrative overhead. It's just the people that make the decisions that aren't necessarily technical, and they see the buzzwords of fixed cost or varying cost that kind of point them one way or another. Another selling point, and something that I brought up previously, is like the ease of deployment for Windows 365. This scenario here, when I was meeting with this particular client, and I had their their server IT engineers and their desktop administrators in one room. I mean, they actually started like almost yelling at each other on who was going to support what. Luckily, I was able to pitch this to them because, again, the desktop team, while they didn't have any insight into Azure much at all, they utilized Intune for their policy management, application deployment, and whatnot. So they understood that. So when I explained to them that if you're familiar with Intune, you could pretty much provision cloud PCs. That's what really kind of sold this combo solution to them. Whereas then the IT engineers, who worked in Azure, the server engineers, they work in Azure all the time. They understand Azure infrastructure. It was almost second nature to them to build the VMs. The stuff that they just needed to learn was about building a host pool, workspace, scaling plans. Stuff that's exclusive to AVD.
Yeah. Where it gets even more complicated is when accessing that Azure network, so the private network, or adding custom images come into play. Because now you've got the Azure overhead as well as Windows 365.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for presenting. That was awesome.
No problem. Thanks for allowing me to present.
Let's see here. And I want to, my screen went away. I'll thank everybody for joining too. Let's see here. All right, the next meeting is on November 9th, it looks like. That's the second Tuesday. And tentatively, we have a session on NetApp files by NetApp. So I've asked them not to be too salesy on that. I think there's a lot of good information around that they'll be able to help clarify. So look for an announcement on that. We should have that coming out pretty soon. I'm going to stop recording. Let's see here.